and northwest England. And it's a mild night. It's going to be frost-free virtually across the board. But it'll be a bright start to the day for parts of, say, the Midlands into eastern England. Some sunshine here at times, a better chance compared to this afternoon. Elsewhere, generally cloudy skies, but the area of cloud and rain across Scotland sinks south into Northern Ireland, northwest England, and it brightens up for the north of Scotland with some sunshine here, albeit with a few showers for the far north. Feeling a bit colder here, otherwise it's another very mild afternoon to come with temperatures largely in the double figures. A lot of cloud cover then as we end Wednesday. Some breaks there to the east and the far north. With high pressure building from the south as we head towards the end of the week, it's going to be largely dry, but it will stay mostly cloudy and it will turn just a little bit colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, Monday to Thursday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. We don't lecture to you or try to tell you what to think. We do a deep delve into a topic with views from across the range of debate, therefore leaving you, the viewer, to make up your own mind. Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, 4 till 6, Monday to Thursday.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
And welcome once again to On the Money, your daily weekday dose of economics, business and consumer news. I'm Liam Halligan. For the next hour, we'll be talking about the latest employment figures and exploring also how some firms are flouting the minimum wage. As ever, a grown-up discussion with people who really know their stuff. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright with your news at 1 o'clock. A mother and her partner have been found guilty over the death of 16-month-old Star Hobson. The toddler died in September last year from catastrophic injuries which she received at her home in West Yorkshire. 28-year-old Savannah Brockhill, pictured here, has been charged with her mother. Her mother, 20-year-old Frankie Smith, was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. Star's great-grandfather said he saw worrying signs of abuse.
My blood used to run cold. I just had a horrible, uneasy feeling about the situation. We even called the car Christine after a horror film in the early 80s. And then Anita used to say, "You do realise little Star's going to finish up a star in the sky." Kept seeing Frankie bruised, and it was just like a domestic relationship.
Boris Johnson is facing the biggest rebellion since he became Prime Minister, with dozens of Tory MPs expected to vote against COVID restrictions this evening. More than 70 backbenchers are threatening to defy the government whip and oppose some Plan B measures for England. It's thought that, as well, up to 10 ministerial aides could resign to oppose the controls. Several separate votes will be held on face mask rules, mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff, and on so-called COVID passports. Despite this, the measures, including COVID passes for entry into nightclubs and other venues, are expected to pass with the support of Labour, who back tighter controls. Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood told GB News he's against the idea of passports.
You could go into a nightclub just using a lateral flow test, a negative one. I could get in using my dog-eared certificate showing I've had 2 vaccinations, which was completed 6 months ago. And that's been proved to show that 2 vaccinations is not enough to tackle this, to make sure that I'm immune. So there is not a logic behind this, but it is impacting big venues which are in my constituency, and that's why I think the government needs to think again on this. Why is it expending so much political capital on this issue when actually all of us want to get through this pandemic, get through this wave in a sensible way?
People are still facing problems getting hold of COVID-19 tests for a second day in a row. Lateral flow tests have been unavailable to order via the government website. Double jab people are being asked to take a lateral flow test every day for 7 days if they come into contact with someone with coronavirus. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's appealing to the public to come forward to help the booster jab rollout. Boris Johnson said tens of thousands of volunteers were needed to help give out boosters to curb the spread of the Omicron variant. The government announced a target of nearly 1 million jabs per day to get all eligible adults vaccinated by the end of December. Former NHS Trust Chairman Roy Lilly, though, told GB News that's unrealistic.
To suddenly on Sunday night say, "Oh, listen, and by the way, on Monday we're going to do 1 million vaccinations." Oh, no, we're not. We've got to recruit the volunteers with the estates people who've got to sort out the locations, there's security, there's clinical waste, there's logistics. I mean, this is a big operation, and I'm not saying the NHS isn't up for it. It is. But if you simply do the numbers, the carryover of the unvaccinated into the next day, it's just statistically impossible to do by the end of the month.
In other news, campaigners have described the government's plans to overhaul the Human Rights Act as a power grab and an attempt to put themselves above the law. Justice Secretary Dominic Raab will reveal new proposals which he says will strengthen typically British rights and add a healthy dose of common sense. Some campaigners, though, say these plans are threatening the ability to challenge those in power, and they warn the rights of ordinary people could be fatally weakened by the changes. The wife of a US diplomat who's charged with causing the death of a teenager by dangerous driving will face a UK court early next year. Anne Sakulas is accused of killing Harry Dunn in a road crash outside a US military base, RAF Croughton in Northamptonshire, in August 2 years ago. The Crown Prosecution Service say the case will be heard at Westminster Magistrates Court in January. The trial of a needle-free COVID-19 vaccine is being launched. The University of Southampton has developed a new method of delivery by using a jet of air to push it through the skin rather than a needle. You are right up to date. I'll bring you the latest news in half an hour. For now, On the Money with Liam.
And coming up on The Money today, unemployment remains low and vacancies are high. Good news for workers, you might think, not least as the official data shows wages are also rising. Not so fast, though, because inflation is high, which raises the cost of living. And official investigations show hundreds of UK companies are failing to pay the statutory minimum wage. We'll be digging down into the numbers. Plus, each day on The Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview with a business leader or policymaker. Today we're talking to Graham Holbrook, the CEO and co-founder of a company called Turtle Doves, which specialises in so-called slow fashion. It's a fascinating story of British design and manufacturing. That's later in the show. As ever, I want your views. It's your show too. Get in touch. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. We'll be reading out some of your emails later in the show, so stay with us. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're on The Money. Now, the UK labour market is tight, to use economists' lingo. What that means is unemployment remains low, with numbers published today showing just 4.2% of the workforce were jobless during the 3 months to the end of October. In a tight labour market, staff are also scarce, and on cue, job vacancies between September and November soared to over 1.2 million as companies scrambled to find staff. That's 419,000 more vacancies than during the 3 months ahead of this pandemic. Now, the government's furlough scheme was finally curtailed in September, yet the data so far shows no jump in redundancies. Having said that, those made redundant since furlough ended may still be working out their notice period. Also, to count headline unemployed, you must be registered as actively looking for work. And given the administrative chaos caused by this pandemic, many who are out of work won't be so registered. Now, when labour markets are tight, wages rise. And between August and October, pay was on average 4.9% higher than the same period in 2020 as companies tried to secure staff. Now, inflation hit 4.2% in October, and when the November number comes out tomorrow, we may see the cost of living rising faster still. But for now, wage growth at 4.9% is higher than inflation, so living standards on average are just about being maintained. But amidst all these relatively rosy employment and wage numbers, there are causes for concern. A new government report has named and shamed over 200 UK companies who are failing to pay the statutory minimum wage. The minimum wage is currently £8.91 an hour, and from April next year it will rise to £9.50 an hour. It's slightly lower if you're 21 or 22, £8.36, but again that rises to £9.18 next April. Yet the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy has just reprimanded 208 businesses for shortchanging workers a total of £1.2 million in what this official report calls a clear breach of national minimum wage law. Such businesses now face fines, and not only the latest corporate culprits, because since 2015, the government has ordered employers flouting minimum wage law to repay over £100 million to more than 1 million workers. The list of guilty firms includes a few well-known names, but many are relatively small consumer-facing outfits, hotels, restaurants, care homes, or childcare nurseries. So while the UK labour market looks quite strong, according to the headline numbers, with unemployment and wages growing, beyond those headlines, there are clearly questions to answer, and that's our On the Money question today. How widespread is the non-payment of UK minimum wages? This is a vital subject. That government report I talked about on the minimum wage being flouted. For my money, it didn't pick up nearly enough media attention amidst all the political shenanigans going on. That's why we're focusing on it here on The Money. And to do so, I'm delighted to welcome Parmjit Dhanda, who's a former government minister under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and a former trade union official. We also have Nikki Jolly. She's the managing director of HR Today, up there in the northeast of England. We have James Townsend, employment partner at Howard Kennedy Law Firm. And on The Money regular, John Longworth, somebody with serious experience, used to run the British Chamber of Commerce, and he's now chairman of the Independent Business Network of Family Businesses. Welcome to all of you. Parmjit Dhanda, let's talk to you first, if we may. It's great to see you on the show. So you used to be an official with the trade union Prospect. As a former minister under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, you were part of the government that actually brought in the minimum wage back in the late 90s. What do you think of the fact that an official report by the Department of Business and Energy is showing that hundreds of British firms, hundreds, are not actually paying the minimum wage?
Well, it's quite shocking, Liam. It affects thousands of employees. And you look at the possible reasons for it, is it will be a genuine mistake. But others have actually kind of tried to bend rules and say, well, if you work here, you've got to pay for the uniform and we'll take that out of your salary. And they simply can't do things like that. Likewise, people who have to travel journeys in their work time not being paid for that, even though it's part of the job. So I think there isn't really much excuse for it. It's been around, as you quite rightly say, the 1997 Labour government brought in a minimum wage. We now have a living wage. And it really has to be paid. I think the minister's actually quite right in producing this list of 208 companies. And it won't have been a great day for those companies. You're quite right. It may have been clouded with other news stories going on out there at the moment. But if you're a Lancashire County Cricket Club or your Waterstones or any one of those nurseries, it's going to be an embarrassing day. They will have to pay the money, and some of them will face fines as well. So I hope this is going to be a lesson for those companies to ensure that they do pay it.
Now, the list of firms who have been highlighted by the Department for Business and Energy is available on their website. I haven't named them because in each case they've come up with various reasons why it happened, and the companies that you mentioned, Parmjit, of course, deny any wrongdoing. But let's move on to Nikki Jolly. Nikki, it's great to have you on the show. You've been on the show many times. You run an employment agency, a very reputable employment agency up there in northeast of England. You're based in Darlington. What do you make of the fact that employers aren't always paying the minimum wage? I know a lot of the jobs you arrange are very reputable. They tend to be more skilled jobs in manufacturing. But it's not on, really, is it, in modern Britain when you've got statutory minimum wage and some employers are trying to get around it?
I mean, I think there's the whole argument about minimum wage and how it works and everything else. But I think the reality is we all know that it's out there. It's easy to find the information. I mean, you can literally just Google it. Anybody who's not sure, and if they're saying they're confused and they don't know, I do think it could be simplified. I think this age 21 to 22 just makes it a little bit more complicated for people to hide behind. But, you know, the reality is it has been there a long time. People do know. Whoever's doing their payroll will know. Most systems automate it.
You
don't take anything from it.
Nikki, we just lost you there, but we got the gist of what you were saying from HR today. James Townsend, you're an employment partner at Howard Kennedy. What would you say to people watching this who may feel that they or members of their family aren't being paid the minimum wage? What should they do? Because, of course, people don't want to lose their jobs, do they? And if they complain, they may worry that it will count against them.
Well, look, thank you very much for highlighting this, Liam. I think it's a really important matter which should be addressed. And the question you're asking me really relates more to individual enforcement. All workers have the right to be paid national minimum wage, £8.91 for those who are over 23. It's going to rise to £9.50 in April 2022. If you find as an individual that you are not receiving your national minimum wage, you can take enforcement action yourself. You can take that before an employment tribunal or the ordinary courts. And if you're treated to your detriment by your employer, then you have additional potential to bring further claims. And if a worst case scenario happens and you are dismissed, you will be automatically unfairly dismissed. So it could become very expensive for an employer if an employer treats you to your detriment because you seek to enforce your rights. Now, that's the individual side of things. We're obviously today looking at the 208 employers who've had enforcement action taken against them by HMRC. In those circumstances, HMRC have the power to actually provide a penalty of 200%, up to £20,000 per worker. But that money, of course, goes to the government, not to the individual worker. And I think that's a debate in itself. Should actually the penalties be going to the worker who hasn't received the money, or should it be going to the government?
Well, you think the workers should be recompensed? They're the ones who've lost out. John, you've worked at you ran the British Chamber of Commerce. You've been involved in many businesses. Does it surprise you there are sharp practices going on to the extent that they are? Firms not paying the minimum wage? Crikey.
Yeah, I mean, there are always sharp practices, of course, at the margins. And in the supply chains of larger companies, you will often find things that are not right. I mean, we've seen that in relation to the clothing industry, for example, in Leicester, only a couple of years ago, where there were real problems. And, of course, overseas suppliers can have real problems as well, who are competing with British companies who are paying the minimum wage. So there's no excuse for not paying the minimum wage. There's clearly a mechanism here, HMRC are enforcing it. Yeah. It's in HMRC's interest to do it whatever, even if they don't get that compensation themselves, because they get the tax from it.
And the fact that you're saying this, you're a captain of industry, John. Workers should feel empowered watching this. If they feel they're not being paid the minimum wage, they should speak up. The government's on their side, decent businesses are on their side, recruitment agencies are on their side.
Otherwise, it's unfair competition as well, which is important. But the but is, and the but I was coming to, is that governments do need to be careful about what minimum wage is set at, because not only are we competing within the UK, but we're also competing for jobs against jobs in other countries. So if we do overprice labour, then actually what you end up with is a loss of jobs in the end.
We're about to go to the break, John, but we're coming back after to carry on with this discussion. But briefly, what do you think of the new minimum wage?
Well, I think the new
£9.50, £10, is it a bit toppy?
It's pushing the limits. Yeah. I mean, one of the things, of course, that should have disappeared, which hasn't done, because the government haven't deregulated anything that the EU imposed upon us yet, is the Agency Workers Directive. Because often you're in a situation as employers where actually in the past you might have employed people for a period of time on a higher wage, in fact, but knowing that in fact you only have to have them for that period of time, seasonal workers, for example. But unfortunately, the Agency Workers Directive, of course, prevented that sort of activity. Not talking about zero hours contracts now, we're talking about legitimate contracts for periods of time, seasonal work. And so that sort of thing needs sorting out as well, in conjunction with things like the minimum wage.
We're going to carry on this important discussion after the break. I know there's a lot of interest among our viewers in this, the extent to which the minimum wage law is being flouted here in the UK. We've got an official government report in our back pockets that says it's an important subject. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. We will keep this important discussion going with today's expert panel. Parmjit Danda, former government minister, Nikki Jolly, managing director of HR Today, James Townsend, an employment lawyer, and of course in the studio, John Longworth, who used to run the British Chamber of Commerce. Your emails are coming in. Keep them coming. We'll read some of them out. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Grey skies for most of us today, with some patches of drizzle here and there as well. But it will be wet in the far northwest for northern and western Scotland in particular, because of these weather fronts which are moving in from the Atlantic, containing some steady and heavy rain at times. This weaker weather front, trapped by an area of high pressure, brings thicker cloud across some central and southern parts of the UK, and some light rain and drizzle at times, particularly for parts of Wales over the higher ground, southwest England as well. A chance of some breaks in the cloud towards the east of England. But thicker cloud once again further north, where it will be damp for western Scotland, with some steady rain there for the far north of Scotland. Quite breezy in the north as well, but that breeze coming in from the southwest brings mild air, so temperatures reaching 13 Celsius in some spots. It's not going to be a cold day, that's for sure. But it will be a grey day and another cloudy night to come for the vast majority. That cloud lowering to cover the hills in the west, and some patchy drizzle once again, especially in the west. The steady rain across Scotland pushes south into parts of Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and northwest England. And it's a mild night. It's going to be frost-free virtually across the board. But it'll be a bright start to the day for parts of, say, the Midlands into eastern England. Some sunshine here at times, a better chance compared to this afternoon. Elsewhere, generally cloudy skies, but the area of cloud and rain across Scotland sinks south into Northern Ireland, northwest England, and it brightens up for the north of Scotland with some sunshine here, albeit with a few showers for the far north. Feeling a bit colder here, otherwise it's another very mild afternoon to come with temperatures largely in the double figures. A lot of cloud cover then as we end Wednesday. Some breaks there to the east and the far north. With high pressure building from the south as we head towards the end of the week, it's going to be largely dry, but it will stay mostly cloudy and it will turn just a little bit colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Now, UK employment numbers remain strong with just 4.2% of the workforce registered as jobless. That's a relatively low share by historic standards. But we're discussing the failure of hundreds of companies, according to an official report, to pay the statutory minimum wage. Let's have another quick look at the minimum wage there. You can see it's £8.91 per hour. And it's £8.36 if you're 21 to 22 years old. And from April 2022, the national minimum wage goes up to £9.18 per hour. I'm still with my expert panel here. Let's go first to Parmjit Danda. Parmjit, to remind viewers, you are a former Labour minister, used to be a trade union official with the trade union Prospect. How concerned are you that as the pandemic carries on, as the battle for staff gets tougher, that workers could actually be more exploited by companies, that there may be a wider lack of payment of the minimum wage?
I am concerned about it, Liam, and I think it's a very pertinent question. You said some really interesting underlying things about the current employment market. It's very volatile. Yes, there are jobs out there to be had, but we've got to remember we're certainly nowhere near out of COVID at the minute. In an industry that I know very well, as in my day job as executive director of back Heathrow, there are something like 1 million jobs in aviation. We've already seen in terms of the minimum wage and people not being paid it in the retail sector, in the care sector. So with that kind of employment volatility out there and not clear knowledge of how many people are actually unemployed because they're coming out of the furlough system and all the rest of it, there is a real danger of there being an unnoticed mountain of people out there that are not getting the pay and rations that they would be expecting to get. What can we do about it? Well, I think one of the obvious things to say as a former trade union official is it does help being a member of a trade union. And if you think you've been shortchanged, I dare say amongst those 208 companies, there will have been very many trade unions involved in terms of making that point. So those firms have been highlighted and will have to pay that money.
Very briefly, Parmjit, because we haven't got much time. The Labour Party has said stick to a £10 minimum wage. We're almost there. Some unions have been pushing for a £15 minimum wage. Do you think a £15 minimum wage would be dangerous because it would discourage employment or not?
I think it's really important to be economically credible for the Labour Party to get back into government. That's the key thing here. It certainly was in my day.
Interesting, and your day will come again, I'm sure, Parmjit. Nikki Jolly, let's go to you. You're up there in the northeast in Darlington. Have you heard of this happening? Obviously, it doesn't happen in firms that you work with. You're a very reputable HR company and recruitment agency in your own right. But do you hear of this on the grapevine? Workers basically being stitched up?
I'll be honest, in the Northeast, I've never heard of anybody not getting minimum wage. It's just not something that we hear, whether they choose not to tell us because we're in HR and, you know, we would advise them against it. But it's certainly not something I'm familiar with as being common practice, I've got to be honest.
James Townsend, employment partner at Howard Kennedy Lawyers. I must say, my observation, if I look at the building trade, which I know pretty well for a journalist, it must be said, what sometimes happens is that workers get a contract or they're taken on, they're put through the books as working 40 hours a week on a minimum wage, but they know if they want to keep that job, they have to work 50 hours. And of course, HMRC aren't there clocking on and off bricklayers, plasterers, plumbers on building sites and all the rest of it. There are ways to get around the minimum wage, aren't there, if firms are determined?
Well, there is an obligation for employers to keep records, and the burden of proof is, of course, on the employer. And the employer has to keep those records for 6 years. So it's not that easy for an employer to get out of paying national minimum wage. A lot of companies historically sometimes got tripped up because actually calculating the national minimum wage isn't as straightforward. You know, some employers were deducting monies for safety equipment, hadn't realised that they shouldn't be doing that, and then fell below minimum wage. My experience with the regulations is that most employers do adhere. Obviously, we've got these 208 companies who've been named and shamed, and a lot of them are saying, well, they were technical breaches. These things happen by accident. Actually, the legislation is quite complicated. We thought we could deduct this when we couldn't, etc.
John, what do you make of this? There is this debate going on. Back at Labour conference, Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, said very firmly, we're sticking with a £10 minimum wage. Well, we're heading for a £10 minimum wage, bar the shouting. Some trade unions want £15 minimum wage. This is quite an active debate now, isn't it? As inflation goes up, and we're expecting 5% inflation soon, there will be people pushing for a much higher minimum wage.
There will, and you can't decouple the minimum wage from the economy as a whole and the whole inflation debate, of course. But it's pie in the sky if you actually push minimum wage up too far. all that will happen is that inflation will rise and therefore the minimum wage will not be worth as much as it was before. In other words, it's a mirage. You get £15, but inflation goes up so much you're actually worse off in the end. So you can't decouple it from the economy as a whole. And we've got to make sure we don't get into a vicious spiral of wage rises and inflation of goods that people are buying. And there is a lot of pressure at the moment on ordinary goods that people are buying. You know, petrol is going up in price because the price setter, Asda, no longer sets the price anymore. So everybody's making hay out of petrol prices. It's just one small example. And of course, we've got to remember that COVID's knocked the economy sideways and increased inflation because of supply problems. And of course, the government have failed completely to seize the economic opportunities of Brexit so far, partly because they're distracted by COVID, but the excuse is now wearing thin. So we're going to have less productivity, less growth, less and more inflation than we would otherwise have had because of government policy.
Let's give the last word to Parmjit Danda here. Parmjit, as a former trade union official, as somebody in business now, former minister, to go back to my original question, how widespread do you think this is? The Department for Business has highlighted over 200 companies who aren't paying the minimum wage, and they should be congratulated for that. But are they getting a proper handle on the problem, or is 208 firms, in your view, just the tip of the iceberg?
I think to know about 208 firms is a good thing, but the reality is there are going to be far more out there that we just are not aware of at the moment. And I think it's quite right to produce this list, to make it public, because it will make other firms. In some cases, there will be genuine mistakes. There's no two ways about that. But in other cases, they will have done what they can to avoid paying it. And just the fact that these kinds of lists are out there, get published, there are penalties, and they do have to then pay staff, I think is a really welcome thing.
And Nikki Jolly, finally to you, what would you say to workers in the North East and elsewhere if they feel they're not being paid the minimum wage? What should they do? There will be concern that they might undermine their standing in the eyes of their employer if they speak up.
We would always recommend that they speak to their employer first, whether it be through finance or their line manager, and try and deal with it amicably. But it's been mentioned already, if you don't get any joy, there are ACAS that you can go to, there's a small claims that you can go to. You know, you don't have to have left your employer to raise it formally, but our advice would always try and amicably raise this as a point, detail why you think it's wrong, and try and resolve it locally without it being a big issue. That will get away with any genuine mistakes.
And let's go also to James Townsend. What did you think when you saw this report from the government, 208 workers, firms who aren't paying the minimum wage? I am surprised it didn't get a lot more airtime, even amidst all the political shenanigans.
Well, those are the firms against which enforcement action has been taken. Anybody can go on gov.co.uk and we can have a look at the list of names. It's not great to be on that list of names. Those companies are going to want to do better next year. I'd like to just mention one thing, which is to do with the rate of what the national minimum wage should be. And just to give a mention to the National Living Wage Foundation, who suggest £11.05 in London, £9.90 outside of London. The government's obviously taken that into account when setting its new rates. And there are certain roles that are going to pay more than others. And it's important to remain competitive. But the National Living Wage Foundation is an organisation that's been out there for many, many years. And a lot of businesses within the UK are voluntarily subscribing to paying all their workers at that rate. So those employers should be congratulated.
Well, thanks to all my guests, James Townsend there of Howard Kennedy, Nikki Jolly of HR Today, Parmjit Danda, of course, former Labour Minister, former trade union official, and in the studio, John Longworth. We extended that discussion on the minimum wage, on the cost of living, because we feel these are particularly important issues for our viewers. You're watching On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Today's Money Talks interview is coming up. It's with the CEO of Turtle Doves. He's a man who's vowed to design and make all his luxury products here in the UK. But before that, here's your GB News update with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. Let's get you up to date. A mother and her partner have been found guilty over the death of 16-month-old Star Hobson. The toddler died in September last year from catastrophic injuries, which she received at her home in West Yorkshire. 28-year-old Savannah Brockhill has been charged with her murder, and her mother, 20-year-old Frankie Smith, pictured on the left, was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. MPs are debating new COVID restrictions ahead of a vote this evening, as dozens of Conservatives are expected to rebel against the government's Plan B measures. More than 70 backbenchers are threatening to defy the whip. Despite this, the measures, including COVID passes for entry into nightclubs and other venues, are expected to pass with the support of the Labour Party, who back tighter controls. People are facing problems getting hold of COVID-19 tests for a second day in a row. Lateral flow tests have been unavailable to order from the government website. Double jab people are being asked to take a lateral flow test every day for 7 days if they come into contact with someone with coronavirus. The wife of a US diplomat who's charged with causing the death of a teenager by dangerous driving will face a UK court early next year. Anne Sokolas is accused of killing Harry Dunn in a road crash outside the US military base, RAF Croughton in Northamptonshire in August 2 years ago. National Express has agreed to the takeover of rival Stagecoach, which sees two of the UK's biggest transport firms merge together. It'll create a combined worth of around £1.9 billion. Together they'll have a fleet of about 40,000 vehicles and a workforce of around 70,000. You're up to date. I'll be back with your latest headlines at 2 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Lots of you getting in touch to give us your thoughts on employment and minimum wage flouting. Alex says it's not just those companies flouting the minimum wage that need to be dealt with, but those employers exploiting illegal workers too. Gary says, my valeting business went under because I paid employees minimum wage, but a competitor paid their staff on a self-employed basis per vehicle. This needs dealing with. Doug says when it comes to employment rights, is it not a fact that if you're a casual worker, perhaps on benefits, you have no rights and the employer can abuse this? And David says the minimum wage should be high enough for a single person to live without the employer's subsidy of housing benefit and tax credits. With many, many emails on this subject. Thanks to them all. Keep them coming. Now, uncertainties about Plan B and other anti-COVID restrictions are clearly already impacting business and consumer sentiment. Christmas parties and other events are being cancelled. The numbers using public transport are falling, and travel agents have reported a collapse in bookings. As ever, it's the hospitality industry on the front line when consumer confidence wobbles. So I recently sat down with Patrick Dardis. He's the CEO of Young's, a chain that operates hundreds of British pubs. Patrick Dardis told me that the loss of business during the crucial 2 weeks before Christmas is particularly tough for pub landlords.
I am very concerned about the 2 weeks prior to Christmas. The 2 weeks.
Very busy weeks for you guys.
Two busiest weeks of the year for the sector. And it's the 2 weeks that actually, believe it or not, are the things that actually allow businesses to survive. Those 2 weeks are so critical for parts of the sector. Not necessarily for us, but for individual owner-operators and part of the sector, it is significant. And if they lose 30-40% of that, they're probably losing their business.
So that was Patrick Dardis, the CEO of Young's, no less, and we'll be showing a full-length version of my exclusive In-Depth Money Talks interview with the Young's CEO later this week. Now, sticking with the impact of anti-COVID restrictions on business and travel, GB News East Midlands reporter Will Hollis is at Nottingham Station and he's checking out the mood. Will, we've got these new restrictions. We've got government on television telling everybody to be concerned about a new COVID variant. What's it done for travel and business where you are?
Yes, where I am today, Nottingham train station, one of the busiest train stations in the East Midlands region. People do seem to be coming and going. It doesn't seem to be any visible effect. The numbers will come later as we see the effects of Plan B come into fruition. Just to give you a bit of a reminder of what those are. Earlier last week, we saw that masks would be introduced in more public places, for example, in theatres, in cinemas. We've also seen the work from home order that came in yesterday. Tomorrow is the big one. It's the one that has got a lot of people concerned and a lot of people either side of the debate, either quite angry to see vaccine passports, COVID passports, they really should be described as, although part of it is showing your vaccine status, you can also show a lateral flow test, a negative lateral flow test in the last couple of days. But yes, as you say, one of the bigger impacts of these restrictions that we've seen in the past always affects travel. We know that rail travel was particularly down in the height of the pandemic. Those numbers have appeared to be coming back over the last year or so when we've seen some of the restrictions removed after that winter national lockdown. As I said, the numbers are coming in. We'll only see that in the next few days and probably more so in the new year when people do start to batten down the hatches and see a harder winter at Christmas. Obviously, people are still trying to enjoy what they can. They're still trying to get out and about. And university students, I don't believe they've left Nottingham yet, so they're still around in this area as a big university city. So I spoke to the Rail Delivery Group. They represent train operating companies up and down the country, and they said that rail companies will continue to support the government's efforts to tackle coronavirus by encouraging passengers who can't work from home to wear a face covering unless they're exempt. They also said with enhanced cleaning and ventilation, which refreshes the air in carriages every 6 to 9 minutes out of 10, 8 out of 10 on 8 out of 10 of the trains, our passengers can travel with confidence. It's not just rail, though. People actually physically getting on a train or even on a bus, but it's where they're going. It's the businesses in places like Nottingham, these big economic hubs that could be affected in the most part by these restrictions. Just to give you a bit of an idea, in the East Midlands Chamber, which represents Leicester, Nottingham, Derbyshire, in terms of the financial comings and goings of this part of the country, they're really concerned about whether there are going to be any benefits given to people, given to businesses, any support that we saw, like the furlough scheme, like a reduction in VAT. They said in a quote that adding a greater burden to many businesses, particularly those in sectors such as events and hospitality, comes with a cost that will weigh heavily on business. This is just the start of what might happen, and I think over the next few days we're going to see more and more about how business and travel will be affected.
Will Hollis, our East Midlands reporter there, thanks a lot for that update. We'll be keeping a close eye on the impact of these new restrictions on the economy, on business, on travel here on The Money, with the help of our regional correspondents like Will. Now, the big picture today is that unemployment remains relatively low, as we've been reporting. And in most parts of the country, those who have found themselves unemployed during the pandemic have generally found work. Changing jobs can be stressful, though. It can be daunting. And given that, here at On The Money, we asked the Stockport Homes Group, a social landlord which also has a recruitment arm, what job seekers should be doing as they look for work.
I think it's a really challenging time. So if you're receiving a lot of rejections, and sometimes you're not actually even receiving a direct rejection, it's radio silence. So it's really important to break up the day, to do those things as well that kind of center yourself a little bit, because it can just sometimes feel like a real fruitless task. But also as well, seek advice from services like ours, because in the great scheme of things, if that's what's happening, there's usually a reason. There's something that's the disconnect, that whether that's you're applying for roles that aren't quite, matching to your CV and your skill set, or whether there's something quite blindingly obvious about your CV that you're not seeing. It's really, really important that you get somebody else who's not poured their heart and soul into producing that document to go and look at it afterwards, because they'll be able to say, actually, do you know what? You've used 3 different types of font, or you've just got this entire section here that should be probably more in this area.
Amanda Ward there, who works at Stockport Homes, and that's an employer that did help somebody called Ian Barrow. Ian worked at Manchester Airport but found himself out of work when the pandemic hit, as did so many others working in the airline industry. Ian struggled to find a new job and completed a work placement with Stockport Homes before securing a permanent job with that team. Ian joins us now to tell us about his experience of changing roles. Ian, thank you so much for joining us on The Money and sharing your experience with me and with our viewers. What would you say then to people who have been knocked sideways by lockdown, by the pandemic? They've lost their job, they're looking for a new job.
I would say just to keep going. It was quite frustrating at times, especially when you're applying for jobs and you're not getting any response at all. It can be quite disheartening. One thing I would say is to also look for help. When I came to Stockport Homes, I'd actually gone for a job and unfortunately didn't get it. But I actually got feedback from it, and it was constructive feedback, which helped me. And they also said, one way to get experience is by coming doing the work placement, which I did. And thankfully, from there, I've been offered work.
I guess a lot of it is your sense of self-worth, isn't it? You want to get up every morning and go to work. You want to provide for yourself and your family. You want those people around you, your friends and everyone in your life, to see you as somebody who works and works hard. It must get frustrating when you just can't find work, even though you're trying.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, to be fair, I also think I was battling against thousands of people for each job that I was going for, whereas, prior to the pandemic, it may not have been like that. So, employers can be a bit more selective as well. So it's just a case of, help is out there when it comes to like your CV, just to make sure, obviously, it is right. And, the opening statement on your CV is so important because it's probably one of the, most things that an employer looks for. And you've got to try and tailor your experience to that job. So there is help out there, obviously, for that. So I did find it, really helpful. But yeah, I mean, I've been out of work for probably 5 weeks, I think, in my whole life. So it was frustrating at the time, especially when you've got a family to support as well.
Now, Stockport is a pretty buzzy place. The Northwest, though, in general, has suffered quite a lot during this pandemic. Lots of aerospace going on there, lots of service sector industries. What do you think, in the end, made you get through, Ian, so you find yourself now in the position you are with a permanent job at an employer that you're happy with and is happy with you? What was the key factor that you found within yourself or which someone else helped you with?
I would say it's probably just determination more than anything. I'd say going back to obviously, providing for your family. And I wanted to come to a company where you can also develop as well. It's been great. They're always offering help and advice along with the staff that are here as well. And nothing's ever been too much trouble. So I'd say obviously just keep going. As I say, it can be frustrating when you're not hearing back, but just keep going and try and find a company that you think will obviously benefit from your skills as well, because there's a lot of people out there with transferable skills which may not be in the industry that they're used to, but they can transfer to certain to other roles within certain companies.
Stockport Homes, a fantastic story. Good on you for getting a new job. We're proud of you. We're going live now to the House of Commons, where Sajid Javid is giving a statement ahead of the COVID restrictions debate. Here is the Health Secretary.
Together, seriously. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to... I will, yeah.
Very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. I wonder whether he might consider going a little bit further, because since the data is changing all the time, almost by the minute, it's inconceivable that in a week's time and a week after that we'll be in the same place that we are today. This House needs to consider the information available to it in near real time, and therefore will he go away and consider whether it would be appropriate now to ensure that the House is able to consider these matters for sure next week and the week after that?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will consider that, but it is important. Of course, this is, my honourable friend is right to point out this is a fast-moving situation, and it is right that the government continues to monitor that and respond to that when necessary. But I hope that my honourable friend will agree with me that right here and now, the matter that's being debated in the regulation in front of the House, this is the best possible response that can be given by this Parliament today. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will. Then I need to make some progress. I will.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. If he is going to consider these matters, will he also include consideration of the issue that obviously the virus spreads if people are not able to isolate? So will he think about addressing the issue of statutory sick pay, spreading the scope of SSP and lifting it to a proper rate so people can isolate, not spread the virus and not end up in our hospitals?
I understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the honourable gentleman will know already. Currently, there are some measures in place, such as the ability to get sick pay from day one. There are hardship funds, but I understand what the honourable gentleman has said. He's asked us to look at that further, and we will. All these matters are under review. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do want to turn to some of the information that... No, I will have to... I'll take an intervention later for the honourable gentleman. But some of the things that we have learnt about this new variant. And the first thing is, and these are things that we know certainly it is a fast-moving situation. In the last week, we have been able to determine these things with a high degree of confidence. First, that it is more transmissible. Omicron is more transmissible than the Delta variant. We can see that the growth in Omicron cases here in the UK is now mirroring the rapid increase that we are seeing in South Africa, and the current observed doubling time is around every 2 days. Although yesterday we reported there were 4,713 confirmed cases of Omicron in the UK, the UK HSA estimate that for the number of daily infections was 42 times higher at 200,000. Scientists have never seen a COVID-19 variant that's capable of spreading so rapidly. So we have to look at what we can do to slow Omicron's advance. So I will, to the honourable lady there, then I will, yeah.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, and he's making a strong point about exactly why we need to do far more to address the threat of Omicron. But does he accept that the government's mixed messaging has been incredibly unhelpful, telling people that a tsunami of Omicron is on the way, but at the same time we can go on partying? Absolutely undermines that message. Will he have the moral courage to say that we actually do need to reduce our social contacts, and will he make it possible for people to do that, both with the sick pay we've already talked about and with ensuring that businesses get the financial support they need if fewer people are going into those business premises?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think what we need to do are the measures that are in front of the House today, and I hope the House will support those. I think those are the most important measures that we can take right now. I will give way to my honourable friend.
Secretary of State for giving way. But has he heard the statement or seen the statement from Angelique Katese, the head of the South African Medical Board today, who says that the government's measures on lockdown may be counterproductive, that Omicron is a mild form of COVID-19. It will have huge benefits for herd immunity and protection, and delaying its spread may give time for a more virulent and pathogenic variant to take hold and cause more deaths in the UK.
Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, I think my honourable friend, if I heard him correctly, talked about the government's measures on lockdown. I'm not sure where he's seen these measures on lockdown, because they're certainly not here today being presented by this government. On the issue of whether this is milder or not, I will come to that very shortly. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend, actually building on the point from my honourable friend from North West Leicestershire, and hearing my honourable friend saying he's just about to expand. But the question is this: when would we know whether Omicron gives severe or mild disease? And therefore, if it is mild, how quickly would the decision to be made that this would be of an advantage to get rid of Delta and get a herd immunity which doesn't create strong disease?
Madam Speaker, if my honourable friend will allow me, I'm about to come precisely to the point that he raises. So the second thing about Omicron that I want to share is that although we don't yet have a complete picture of Omicron's severity, even if severity is significantly lower, then the much higher transmissibility of Omicron means it still has the potential to overwhelm the NHS. Take the current observed doubling time of 2 years. And let's say, just for argument's sake, let's take the current doubling time of 2 days, right? And let's say, just for argument's sake, if I say to honourable members, for argument's sake, that Omicron was only half as severe as Delta, half as severe. After the lag between cases and hospitalizations has taken effect, then this would mean it would only buy you 2 days. It would buy you 2 days before Omicron hospitalizations reach the same level as Delta. In England, I will later. In England, 10 people are confirmed to have been hospitalized with the Omicron variant. Now, and I know that some honourable members, they have said that because confirmed hospitalizations from Omicron are low, then we don't need to act. But it's the fact that Omicron hospitalizations are low that means it is now the best time to act. And we've seen during previous waves, we've already seen this, the lag between infections and hospitalizations, it's about 2 weeks. When infections are rising so quickly, we're likely to see a substantial rise in hospitalizations before any measure is starting to have an impact. So there really is no time to lose. I will give way.
I thank my friend for giving way, and I understand the nuanced point that he's making. But just on forecasts, will he accept that many academics have doubted the previous forecast, describing them as hysterical, substantially inflated, consistently overconfident, lurid and severely flawed? We have had a problem with inaccurate forecasts. Would he accept that point?
Yes, I absolutely accept that point. And with previous variants of COVID, we have seen forecasts and estimates, whether it's from academics or think tanks and others, that have been completely off the mark. But all I would just say gently to my honourable friend and other honourable members, Just because forecasts in the past several have been wrong, it doesn't mean to say every estimate or forecast is always wrong. And I hope my honourable friend will note that. I will give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He talks about hospitalisations and the danger that they may cause to the NHS. But will he reflect on the fact that it's not just hospitalisations, but it's the length of stay in hospitals that determines how many beds are occupied? And evidence from South Africa suggests not only are there fewer hospitalisations, but people are in hospital for a much shorter time. Is that reflected in his calculations?
Yes, sir. I can confirm that to my right honourable friend. First of all, he's absolutely right to make that point. Of course, it's not just about entering hospital, but it's about how many days that individual is likely to stay in hospital. And currently, with the Delta variant, I believe it's roughly about 9 days an individual on average stays in hospital. And if that was cut, for example, to 5 or 6 days, of course that would help with capacity. Now, first of all, we can't assume that, because what we are seeing in terms of the hospitalisation, the impact in South Africa, or the hospitalisations there are rising rapidly. There are hundreds of people on ICU and ventilators, that it's hard to read across, given that the average age of the South African population, I believe, is about 27 years, for example. So it's hard to just completely read that across. But I hope he would agree with me, similar to the point I just made on severity, that even if the hospital stay is half of what it is at the moment, at the rate that this thing is growing, and if it continues to grow at that rate, that could be cancelled out, that benefit could be cancelled out in 2 days. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman. Yep.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. He's facing a lot of criticism from behind him, but he should be assured that on these benches we absolutely recognise the dangers of the variants in front of him. But does he accept that, having come into his post saying that the end of restrictions was irreversible, that he has created an expectation that he's going to constantly ignore the scientific advice, which is why he's facing so much disappointment behind him now?
Now, I think the honourable gentleman may have heard earlier when I started my remarks, I talked about what I said at this dispatch box in July, specifically about the risk of a vaccine escape variant. Now, I do want to talk about the vaccines and this variant, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will give way one more time for now to my honourable friend, and but I will come back to other honourable friends.
I'm very grateful, and I think my views on this are pretty well understood. Just given the case that he's setting out, I think one thing I'm puzzled by is why he's only going as far as he is. Can he just explain to us why, in his estimation, the measures he's taking are equal to the situation which he's describing?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a very fair question, as always, from my honourable friend. The measures that we are setting out, we are taking into account the very best advice that we are being given, including making sure that we're not just listening to every piece of advice or every forecast that we're seeing. My honourable friend will remember back in the summer, if we had listened to some of the advice we were receiving, we wouldn't have opened up in the way that we did. So we are taking account of the advice, deciding on whether it should influence our decision making, and then coming to a balanced and proportionate response, which are the measures that I've talked of, I will talk about here today, but also, for example, increasing the booster programme, which I will turn to in a moment too. Now, I must make some progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, but I will come back to honourable members in a moment and take further interventions. I do want to talk about the importance of what we learnt about Omicron and the vaccines. Vaccines have proven to be highly effective against previous variants, for example, the Alpha and Delta variants. This has weakened the link between cases and hospitalisations and deaths, and it has allowed us to reopen our country once more. But recent analysis from the UK HSA has shown that 2 doses of a vaccine provide much lower levels of protection against symptomatic infection from Omicron when compared to the Delta variant. But, more encouragingly, effectiveness rose considerably in the early period after a booster dose, providing around 70 to 75% protection against symptomatic infection. This data starkly shows the importance of booster doses and why we're working so hard to get many more boosters into arms, and I will say more about that in just a moment. Now, our strategy is to take proportionate action now, to come down hard on this virus and strengthen our defences rather than waiting until it's too late. I will to my honourable friend. Yeah.
The whole point is
that we cannot be complacent about assuming that this likely huge increase in infections is all going to have very mild symptoms. And therefore what the government is doing is taking modest steps to ensure that if that doesn't happen, we will be prepared. And will he promise that actually if that doesn't materialise, then he will be able to relax again?
Madam Deputy, we all want to relax, and I wish I was more relaxed right now than I already am. But my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I agree with her. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
I'm really grateful. I appreciate that this is an escalating situation which needs urgent attention. But the reality is, if we are enabling social mixing, that is the very place where we're going to see transmission, as we did with Delta last December. So will he review these measures? Because it seems that these statutory instruments before us today are already out of date.
It is important, of course, that we keep measures under review, but I do believe, for the reasons I've said earlier, and I will continue to set out, these set of measures before the House, they are the right balanced and proportionate response. Yes, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He may be interested to learn that Dr Kirksey gave evidence to the Science and Technology Committee this morning, and rather contra to her piece in the Mail, she actually endorsed what the government is doing. She said that the boosters were definitely the absolute priority, but she said face masks and avoiding mixing, and she was asked specifically about the COVID proposals. She said they sounded like a proportionate response to the requirements of the situation.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for sharing that with the House, and I think it's important that to hear that support from South African experts too. I will give my way.
Thanks for giving way. We are, of course, all concerned, I think, to hear that Plan C measures are being discussed already. I'd be grateful if you could lay that to rest. But could I take him to the question of hospitalisations? There's a difference between people who've been hospitalised with Omicron and from Omicron. So could he tell us what he knows about those cases, how many came into hospital for other reasons, and how many have actually arrived in hospital because they are seriously ill with Omicron?
Well, what I can tell my right honourable friend is that there are approximately, in English hospitals, about 6,000 people in with COVID, as they're positive COVID cases. Of those, around, as I've shared this information with the House before, because I was determined to get this information when I first became Health Secretary, of those, approximately 80% are there because of the symptoms they have from COVID, and around the rest, about 1/5, are there because for other reasons, and they also, of course, have been tested for COVID and they happen to have COVID. I hope that is helpful for my right honourable friend. I will give way one more time for now, and then I will.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. I really must press him on this issue on behalf of workers in my constituency across the country, particularly low-paid workers. Why isn't the government bringing a vote today on whether to increase sick pay to real living wage levels? We can't have a situation where the government is making the case that this matter is so serious, which it is, yet forcing low-paid workers to choose between putting food on the table and self-isolating and protecting the rest of the community.
Where I agree with the honourable gentleman is about the importance of support for people with measures, and there is support already in place. I can see from the way he's raised this question that he thinks there should be more support. The honourable gentleman thinks that. I understand that we have a difference of view on that, but it is something that we keep under review. Now, when I set out our autumn and winter plan to this House in September, I outlined how we'd hold measures in reserve in case the NHS was likely to come under unsustainable pressure, and this would then stop it being able to provide treatment that we want all our constituents to receive. Yesterday, the NHS England announced that it will return to its highest level of emergency preparedness, level 4 national incident. And unfortunately, there is now a very real risk that the exponential rise of Omicron cases translates into a spike in hospital admissions and threatens to overwhelm the NHS. We've done so much already to boost the capacity of the NHS. We've increased the number of doctors by 5,000 over the past year and the number of nurses by almost 10,000. And we've also expanded the number of beds available. But we've also had to put in place measures for infection control which have limited this capacity. And there's already over 6,000 COVID-19 patients in hospital beds in England. Despite the progress that we've made, the NHS will never have unlimited numbers of beds and nor unlimited numbers of people to look after anyone that is in those beds. So if we think that capacity risks being breached, then we simply have to step in. Because we know that what this would mean in practice for both COVID and for non-COVID care. It would mean one of your constituents, perhaps, is in a car crash. Maybe it's a child in a car crash. They need emergency care. And the NHS having to make difficult decisions about who deserves treatment and who doesn't. Now, I know that someone will...
We're just going to leave Health Secretary Sajid Javid there addressing the House of Commons because we have more breaking news.
So we're going to take you straight to Holyrood, where Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, is outlining what further restrictions could be necessary. And if you look, we can say that the First Minister, we've got a...
result in many more people being off work due to mild illness and isolation. So the impact on our economy and on our ability to deliver critical services will also be severe. Indeed, we are starting to see these impacts already. All of this explains why we must take Omicron extremely seriously. This is not a choice between protecting health and protecting the economy. So let me turn to what, in the Government's judgment, we need to do now to mitigate this challenge. In doing so, I ask everyone again to think in terms of a race between the virus and the vaccines. Our vaccination programme is running fast. We are currently the most vaccinated part of the UK. 46% of the over 12 population have had booster jags already. However, just as vaccines started to win this race, the virus learned to run faster. That means we must deliver boosters even faster. And this is all the more important in light of early data telling us that the protection we have against Omicron infection with just 1 or 2 doses is significantly lower than it is for Delta. We need a booster jag to ensure a substantial level of protection against Omicron infection. So we are taking steps now to get boosters into arms much faster. Getting fully vaccinated is the best thing any of us can do to protect ourselves, our loved ones and the country. So please book your booster jag as soon as possible. Speeding up vaccination is essential, and I want to assure the nation today that it is the Government's top priority. I will shortly set out more detail on exactly how we are going about doing that. But while this is necessary, our judgment is that in the short term it will not be sufficient. While we are speeding up vaccination, we must also try to slow down Omicron. That is why we are also proposing today, albeit very reluctantly, some further protective measures. I'm appealing to everyone to follow today's advice to help slow Omicron down while more of us do get our boosters. And let me be clear, we do not do this lightly. I know how hard it is. Please believe me when I say I would not be asking for yet more sacrifice if I did not genuinely consider this to be necessary in the face of a threat that is very real. So let me set out now what is being asked. Firstly, we want to keep businesses open, but to help achieve this, we are asking them to step up the protections in place in their premises. We intend to amend regulations to put a legal requirement on those running businesses or providing services to take measures which are reasonably practicable to minimise the risk of transmission. We will issue guidance this week to make clear what that means for different sectors. For example, in retail, it will involve a return to the kind of protections in place at the start of the pandemic, for example, measures to avoid crowding and bottlenecks. This will include physical distancing, measures to control the flow of customers and protective screens. For hospitality, it will mean, for example, measures to avoid crowding at bars and between tables, and a reminder of the requirement to collect contact details of customers to help with contact tracing. For employers more generally, the guidance will make clear that enabling staff who were working from home at the start of the pandemic to do so again is now a legal duty. I'm hugely grateful to employers who are already allowing staff to work at home where possible, but we are not yet maximising the impact of home working to reduce the overall number of contacts we are having. We recognise, of course, that there are people who cannot work from home, for example, those who work in manufacturing, hospitality and key public services. We're asking anyone in this position to test regularly before going to work. We have extended the workplace testing scheme, which delivers lateral